The Lucasfilm Studio Showcase Panel on Friday gave us a bunch of brand new information and footage, so here I'll be continuing my coverage of Star Wars Celebration with some movie news. I'll be covering everything we learned from Star Wars Celebration this weekend, both with individual videos and an overall summary of everything later this week, so stay tuned for all of that. And what may turn out to be the biggest announcement from the entire weekend, 3 brand new Star Wars movies were announced to be in the works that will expand the timeline in new ways. In addition to the previous eras, the timeline now includes Dawn of the Jedi at the beginning, and New Jedi Order at the end. I'll probably make another separate video in the future going over all of these eras, but to be brief here, these new additions are very exciting. We'll finally be expanding and telling stories further and further away from the Skywalker saga. As much as we're all attached to these characters and love to see them continue to show up on screen over and over again, moving away from the known galaxy puts a lot less pressure on storytellers to fulfill fan expectation and have to navigate around their attachment to these characters. Set in the Dawn of the Jedi era, James Mangold will direct a Star Wars film about the origins of the Jedi and the dawning of the Force set before the Old Republic, described as a biblical epic. It's said to be inspired by Ben-Hur and the Ten Commandments, and Mangold describes it as a chance to tell the entire story of its own, the birth of the Force. Where did it come from? How was it found? Who was the first Jedi? The film will be set 25,000 years in the past, so we can expect the galaxy to be very, very different. It's been amazing to read the High Republic and see how different the galaxy is, and that's only a few hundred years or so earlier, so I can't even wrap my head around what the galaxy will look like at this point. I think that's probably what I'm most excited to see as of right now, just fleshing out the timeline and seeing what certain planets look like at this point. The Prime Jedi first appeared as a simple mosaic and Octo in The Last Jedi, but it sounds like we'll be getting his entire backstory here in the film by Mangold. Next, set between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, Dave Filoni will direct a Star Wars film culminating the events of the Mandoverse. It'll tie together Ahsoka, The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, and Skeleton Crew in one big crossover event. According to StarWars.com, the project will focus on the New Republic and the escalating war between Imperial remnants and the New Republic. Filoni's movie will also close out the interconnected stories told across the Mandoverse shows. This one has been rumored for a while, and it makes sense to finish off this big interconnected era of Disney Plus shows with a theatrical film. I think Dave Filoni directing the film does concern me a small amount, just because his strength lies more in the storytelling rather than live-action production side of it. But since beginning The Mandalorian, I know he spent a lot of time behind the camera, and the episodes that he has directed have improved, so hopefully by the time this rolls around, it won't be a problem at all. We don't know yet how many seasons of these shows we'll be getting, but I can see all of them getting multiple seasons, so it may still be a while until this film. There are currently 2 untitled Star Wars films on the schedule, one in 2025 and one in 2027. We already know that Taika Waititi has been working on a script for one, and based on what I've heard, I think it would make the most sense for that one to be in 2025, and then possibly have Filoni's in 2027. All of these are still being written, but we know that Filoni and Favreau like to work ahead with their scripts, so they more than likely already have a plan for the story being told in the film. The other ones will likely take a little longer to perfect the scripts and move into production. Ahsoka seems like it'll definitely have multiple seasons just because of how big the scope of the story is, and how important these characters are. Skeleton Crew we don't really know enough about to speculate on how many seasons it'll have, but depending on the reaction, it could get multiple seasons. The Mandalorian can seemingly go on forever, but I believe there have been reports that it'll end after Season 5. And then the Book of Boba Fett will likely get at least a second season eventually. So that's at least a few more seasons of television starting in 2024, which could space us out until 27, when this film wraps up these stories. All of this is speculation, of course, but because of the nature of this movie, this definitely seems like a safe bet to release within the next 5 years or so, and not suffers from the same rewrites and creative problems that have plagued other movies like Rogue Squadron. The final film announced will be set in the New Jedi Order era, set after The Rise of Skywalker. Directed by Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy and set 15 years after the events of The Rise of Skywalker, the film will see Daisy Ridley return as Rey and see her rebuild the Jedi Order. This announcement fills me with so much hope, because despite the backlash that the sequels had, they still had bright moments, and they're also responsible for a lot of young people joining this fandom, so it would be wrong to completely ignore them. There have already been some smaller stories told through publishing since the conclusion of the trilogy that have added more depth and information to the era, filling in some of its holes. And a movie set 15 years after seems like the perfect time frame, where it's been given enough time to breathe after the fall of the Final Order, but where we still get to follow mostly the same characters, while introducing a new cast as well. I personally have a soft spot for these films, despite their flaws, just because they're the first ones I got to see in theaters, so I'm glad that they're continuing these characters' stories. Nothing has been said yet about any of the other cast members returning from the sequels, but if Lucasfilm and Disney can mend those relationships, and the actors can spend enough time away from the franchise where they'd be willing to return, I think it's a possible outcome, at least for someone like John Boyega, whose character would definitely have a role in the story if he came back. We know he's Force-sensitive, so it would make sense for him to appear in a larger role. Grogu is another one that could potentially appear in the film. He'd be 91 years old at the time of the movie, which lines up with Yoda beginning his Jedi training when he was around 100. With all of these, I want to try and limit my expectations until the movie is for sure in production, just because of the rough past few years since the sequels wrapped up, but it's hard not to get excited for Star Wars to be back on the big screen again. As much as these shows have been enjoyable, there's nothing like the lead up to a massive Star Wars film, and then going to see it opening night with friends and talk about it for the next week. Shows are nice, but when there's a new episode every week, and only a month or so between shows, it's hard to have the same buildup of energy and excitement. I think out of these, I'm most looking forward to Mangold's film, set far back in time, mostly just because of how little we know about it. It'll be brand new characters for sure, and I'm intrigued by the idea of a biblical epic in Star Wars. Let me know how excited you are for these films in the comments below. Remember to like the video, and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And check out all of my other coverage for Star Wars Celebration this weekend. Thank you all for watching, and remember, the Force will be with you, always.